Welcome everyone to Couch Potato Diary. It's another week. Thank you all so much for tuning in today. As always, thank you to Deeds and Toxic hanging out in the chat. If you guys have any questions, or anyone hanging out in the chat have any questions, let me know. And yeah, we're kind of, I'm not going to do the full NFL rundown the way we've been doing it. We're going to talk about every team tomorrow on the power rankings. So today is just going to be some of the bigger stories. We're kind of combining Monday and Tuesday since Monday was the holiday. So we're going to talk about the main NFL stories, and then we will get into fantasy football talk with the waiver wire, looking at the dumpster darlings for the week and things like that. So as always, yes, we will be talking a little bit about the Calgary Flames here in a little bit as preseason winds down. All of a sudden, we are getting more and more into okay, this is actually going to be happening now. So we'll get into the Flames probably to close the show today. But if you have any Flames questions, by all means, let me know in the chat, because today was like, okay, I should talk Flames. What's there to talk about right now? So give me a couple of hints in the chat, and we'll get that going as this show rolls along. But yes, let's start the day now talking about the National Football League. All right, I think there are a few big stories coming out of week 4 in the NFL. I think the biggest one is cause for concern out in Philadelphia. This was a team that I had a lot of high expectations for. And I think this was also a team that had a lot of pressure on them coming into this season based off of how 2 seasons ago went and then how last season went. And so now you have to show that last season was kind of the outlier, especially how that ended. You have to show that was the outlier. And the one before that is the one that this team really is. And through 4 weeks, it really seems like last year was kind of what this team is. It was an awful performance against Tampa Bay. Just absolutely brutal. And I think you can explain away a lot of the stuff on offense just with, no A.J. Brown, no Devonta Smith. Any team loses those types of weapons, it's going to set them back. But also, you still have, as we talked about last week, you still have Goddard. You still have Saquon Barkley. They went out and acquired Jahan Dotson to be a number 3 receiver. I get having him be the number 1 is not ideal, but it's not like this team is still devoid of talent. And also, if Jalen Hurts is going to be that guy and be the big money quarterback, you kind of need to be able to beat Tampa Bay. You have to look better than Bo Nix looked last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I thought it was just dreadful. But the big issue is how bad this defense was. They got throttled in this matchup. Their defensive line, after 1 week of looking pretty good against New Orleans last week, the defensive line now looks like it is a problem again out in Philadelphia. And the big thing is, Sirianni just did not have this team ready to play. And if this trends even remotely further the way this is going, then I think that he is probably out of a job. Looking at it now, they're in a bye week next week, so at least a stay of execution there. And then after that, they take on why am I not seeing this? It's an Eagle. How can you not see an Eagle? Oh, they play the Cleveland Browns in Philadelphia. So if you lose that game, you're gone. You're fired. Right? So Sirianni certainly on the hot seat. Speaking of coaches who may need to find other employment soon, the New York Jets take a major step back against the Denver Broncos. And I will admit, we went over on the power rankings on Wednesday. I was duped. I believed when I shouldn't have believed that this is probably still a playoff team, just based off of the AFC, and this is still a talented roster. But to consider them contenders, to consider them as I had them a top 5 team in the NFL is asinine. That was a horrendous loss. And spare me it was rainy and cold. You play in New York, guys. We don't take 4 months off and then you get to play the playoffs in July, okay? You're going to have to, it's not going to get better, the weather situation, as the season goes on. So, A, if it's a problem now, fix it, because you're going to have to deal with it. B, number 2, whatever thing you want to use to list the items, the weather is the same for both. And if you were to tell me before this game that you get Aaron Rodgers in the elements against Bo Nix, I will take that 1,000 times out of 10. Aaron Rodgers, the frozen tundra of Lambeau Field, Green Bay, Wisconsin, playing all of those playoff games so they didn't lose at home for a century. He has played in the elements before. Bo Nix sucks, and he's just out of college, so don't give me it was the weather, because you have Aaron Rodgers, one of the best bad weather quarterbacks in the league, against a kid, and you also had 3 extra days to prepare. Just an abysmal loss for the New York Jets, and the penalties were the killer for this team. And then Robert Salah after the game saying, oh, well, maybe we need to change the hard count up. I am not usually on Aaron Rodgers' side on many things, but for Rodgers to come out and say, or maybe it's time to hold guys accountable, was the perfect response to that, and the perfect way to handle that sort of a situation. And he's right. This team has not held its players accountable for a really long time, and they need to really get this thing on track. And it is not by Aaron Rodgers changing how he does things to fit the rest of this team. Also, you look at who was taking the penalties. It wasn't the rookie left tackle. If anyone should be having trouble with the hard count, it would be that kid. So it wasn't him. So no, this is... I have tried to give Robert Salah the benefit of the doubt because he seems fun, right? You know, you like the energetic guy on the sidelines. You like a guy getting fired up. And also, and I think this is a bigger picture NFL thing to talk about maybe on at a quieter time, but every team is looking for the same thing in a coach. And I like that they kind of went outside the lines and went for the defensive guru guy to go out there and try to be a little bit different. And so I wanted it to work, but it's not. It's not working. I don't think it's going to work. And I think the Jets are going to be worse because of it. In terms of teams who played well, I think if we all watched the preview show on Friday, we have a pretty good understanding that I was not necessarily anticipating that kind of a showing from the Baltimore Ravens. That was impressive as hell. A very good showing over the Buffalo Bills and a really dominant performance by them. Derrick Henry, it seems like they've unlocked that now a little bit, and this is what is so tantalizing about this Baltimore team, is that when it is clicking, it is so much fun to watch, and it is so dominant, and it can be so dominant. I do think that from a Bills standpoint, this was a little bit of a reminder that they have been playing very well to start the year, but this hasn't really been... Like, this is still a roster that has some issues. This is still a team that has some injury problems. And it is just not a complete unit right now for Buffalo. And so I think that is something that it was a nice reminder here. K. Rimney or Crimney, I will get to the fantasy question here in just a moment. Detroit reminding us that they're still really good. We have had some concerns about them for the last couple of weeks, but I think that Seattle is a really good defense, and they kind of torched them a little bit. They played really well. Jared Goff, it was a perfect performance. That was unbelievable. And so for him to do that, I think showed he's legit. But I do think that this kind of showed that Seattle, maybe not on that championship tier, but Seattle is a threat. And right now, Seattle looks like the best team in the NFC West. Right? Yeah, West. I don't know why I blanked on that for a second. But yeah, they look like they are legit too. The Packers, the Vikings, another very impressive performance on Sunday. The defense lets up a little bit, allows Green Bay back into this game, but Brian Flores is an unbelievable defensive coach, and he has done such a great job out there in Minnesota. And Sam Darnold, I don't think it's going to continue at an MVP pace. I am very interested to see how they handle things going over to face the Jets on Sunday morning over in England. But I do think that Sam Darnold is someone that is finally figuring out the right situation for him, and that's been really exciting. And I think the Packers, this is the one where it's like, okay, this Packers defense, we've had a couple are they, aren't they, are they, aren't they? I have now declared my flag in the ground. The Packers defense is mid at best. So I know you've all been waiting for that. A couple of more. Commando's offense is a wagon. We knew that coming in. But Jaden Daniels, you just watch him. He is gliding out on the football field, and the arm strength that he has, and the accuracy, and all of that. Like, it is a complete package what you are seeing with him right now, and that has been just a delight to watch. And it's very exciting. And yes, like, this was against Arizona, who isn't that great of a defense, but to do that against anyone is really, really impressive. So Commanders have to move up in our mental whatever for the NFL here going forward. And the last one, I was duped again, week 1, by the LA Rams against the Detroit Lions for how good I thought they did and how well they hung with that team. Yes, it's injuries, whatever, but I need to get back to my preseason assumption that the Rams aren't shit. So that is a miss by me. And oops on that one. So I'm going to hit the talking football thing again, and we'll get into the fantasy football discussion. All right. Crimney, or K-Rimney, or K-Rimney, has said, what do you think about Diggs for Montgomery and Shaheed? I was not on the Diggs bandwagon to start this year, and I feel like as this offense continues to progress, that maybe he is not going to be as big of a part of it. I do like that they're trying to get him involved right now. But I feel like there's been a couple of times where, if Dell makes a play or if someone else makes a play, then maybe there isn't a Diggs thing. Like, I feel like he could get pushed into being an afterthought. And so, Crimney, are you getting Diggs, or are you trading him away for Montgomery and Shaheed? Because I actually think this is a fairly fair trade, especially as we go now into the bye weeks, getting a little bit more depth. If you are trading away a Stephon Diggs and acquiring, so you would be getting Diggs. Okay. I still don't mind it. I know I was just kind of talking down Stephon Diggs. I still don't mind it. Montgomery, like, it was very obvious last night who the guy was in Detroit, right? So Montgomery is still going to get some, but that is maybe not necessarily as reliable a source of touches going forward. And Shaheed, I think, looks awesome, and I think is really, really talented. And if Derek Carr gets a perfect pocket all the time, then I think there are going to be a lot of options for Shaheed. I don't think, though, that you worry about giving him up. And so I think you are taking two pieces that are kind of like, if this, and this hits, then maybe. And getting Stephon Diggs, who I know I said could get pushed back in that offense, but it also feels like this offense is growing a little bit. So I would say do that. I would go out and acquire a Diggs, if that were the case. I don't think you're overpaying in that situation. And, like, you're a Collins injury away from being right in there. Although, I mean, we just talked about that with the other two guys, that you kind of need injuries for them. So maybe not the best point, but I do think I would take that deal, and I would be getting Diggs in that spot. Okay, let's go now into the fantasy football waiver wire as we get now into the bye week season, and we start to see, okay, what kind of depth do we actually have? A few of these are going to be guys you can play right away, and a few of these are going to be guys that maybe you need to just kind of stash for a rainy day. At quarterback, this one is a bit more of a if you are desperate play. It is Justin Fields, 32% owned. They'll be facing the Cowboys this week, and I do think that Dallas can be a tricky matchup for quarterbacks at times, but you look at how the Cowboys have struggled so far this season. Yes, Thursday night against Daniel Jones, they give up a lot of yards though, and I think that is something to keep an eye on. Before that, it was Baltimore, and we all saw Baltimore just carve them up for just absolutely destroyed them, right? So for 3 quarters anyway. And then before that, it was New Orleans. Okay, well, the Saints didn't punt, so they played pretty well. And then the week before that, yeah, they beat Cleveland. But I think we're starting to see giving up 17 points to Cleveland is maybe a little bit more concerning than it should be. So I think that Justin Fields has an opportunity to put up some points this week. And so if you have a Jalen Hurts on a bye or something like that, I think that this is a fine pickup to help you out in that area. By the way, the cutoff that I have for these is 35% owned or fewer. So in some deeper leagues, or in some less deep leagues, a Geno Smith being available or something like that could be a real option for you as well. At running back, the first one here is Roschon Johnson, 27% owned. He had 15 carries in the last 2 weeks. He gets the touchdown this week, and quite frankly, he looks like the best running back in Chicago. So that is the guy who I think that has the best opportunity, I think maybe of anyone on the waiver wire this week, to be a long-term solution, but also be someone who can help you out in a bit more of the immediate. At 24% owned, it's Samaje Perine. Very quiet in the passing game this week, but he does get a goal line look, and that gets him into the end zone, which does kind of save his day a little bit. As Deeds, I don't know if Deeds is still hanging out in the chat, but Deeds knows that kind of saved him a little bit. Deeds has him, I think, on his bench. He and I were I almost got my first vampire there. We almost got there, but not quite. So, but still, Perine, I think, is someone who has some opportunities, because Steele's look bad, and it's a couple of fumbles now for Steele, and it feels like he has been kind of pushed now into short yardage fullback, running back 3 territory. I think Perine is always going to have a role in the passing game. Kareem Hunt looked fine. That is one that is available in a number of leagues. Ethically, I have an issue with picking him up. Maybe I'll do some Googling to see how much he has kind of learned from that situation that he had a few years ago. But he does feel like he's going to get a bit more of the carries out there. And the last running back is Tyler Algier. He had 10 carries / targets this week. 8 carries, 2 targets. He's not going to take Bijan's role, but there is a chance that he still gets his a little bit. And he is showing, like, he is still a talented running back. And I think right now for an Atlanta offense that still kind of feels a little stuck in the mud, they are going to need to just have as many talented people as they can. That was one thing we didn't talk about in the NFL rundown, but Atlanta, like, the final score looks better than it was. They got, I believe it was a pick 6 and a muffed punt for a touchdown, and then a bunch of field goals to help them win. So I wouldn't be taking Atlanta too seriously right now, but I think Algier has a chance in this offense. At wide receiver, Wan'Dale Robinson, 27% owned. Even if Neighbors is healthy, he has had 8+ targets in 3 of 4 games. Now, those targets are coming from Daniel Jones. So, concerns. But this is still, I think, someone who is just getting a whole lot of volume. And you have to understand that the floor could be 0. Like, that this is not just a nice little safe 4 points. Let's just get it and move on. No. This could goose egg you. And quite honestly, the ceiling ain't that high. But there is still a pretty good range in there where I think you can be successful with Wan'Dale Robinson. Another one here, Michael Wilson, 17% owned, 16 targets in the last 2 weeks combined. He, I haven't checked the snaps this week, but coming into this week, he was getting the second most amount of snaps in that wide receiver room. And so I think as Kyler Murray continues to get settled in and continues to get going, Wilson is going to continue to get his opportunities. And so I think that's a decent play. And the last one is Xavier Legette at 14% owned. He balled out with Thielen out last week. It's a really tough matchup against Chicago, so this is not a guy to play this week, I don't think at all. But I do think that this is a guy that will continue to show some value in this offense, because, like, if he plays well in an Adam Thielen absence for a team that probably isn't going anywhere, it makes more sense for this team to run out Legette every week than it does to run out an Adam Thielen. So I think that now, keep an eye on the quarterback situation, obviously, but I think this is a player who is going to continue to get more opportunities as this season goes along. At tight end, we're throwing a dart, and this week it lands on Ty Conklin. 34% owned. He had 8 targets last week. We just talked about it. It was just an ugly game. On the defensive side, it is toxic. This is your time. You're asking for defenses. We got them for you. 28% owned. The Seattle defense going up against the New York Giants. I know we just kind of talked up our boy Wan'Dale Robinson there a little bit, but this defense is going to have a good time, I think, against the New York Giants this week. So a good one there. If you need a little bit more help and they are taken or whatever, Denver against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders did finally put up some points this week against Cleveland, but Denver's defense looked pretty good, even in the elements against the Jets, and Vegas's offense continues to be bad. So that is the Fantasy Football Waiver Wire for the week. let's move into now the fantasy dumpster darlings. Each week I go through the fantasy schedule and to see who had the best performances of the least owned players in the NFL, and we put together the fantasy football dumpster darlings. This week, our quarterback, 32% owned, so a little higher than we normally go. But Justin Fields, 32% owned, put up almost 32 fantasy points at 31.98. We balance out. We were a little high at 32. But it doesn't get any lower than 0. And that is where Jeremy McNichols comes in. 0% owned, 19.9 fantasy points. Justice Hill, 15% owned. So people got real excited about our guy after week 1 and then cut him immediately. But now he comes back up with another big performance as he gets 18.6 fantasy points. Our wide receiver room, Dontavian Wicks, almost as many letters in his name as percentage owned, 15% owned, 22.3 fantasy points. Joshua Downs, 21% owned for the Indianapolis Colts. Joe Flacco comes in, has himself a day, and gets Jeter Downs to 18.2 fantasy points. After that, we have at the tight end spot, Tucker Kraft, 14.3 fantasy points for the 6% of people who owned him. Our flex option, we just talked about him in the waiver wire. It's Xavier Legette, 14% owned at 16.6 fantasy points. On defense, the Atlanta Falcons, 5% owned. Everyone's scared away by Derek Carr, and they come up with 17 fantasy points. And then our kicker, the number one kicker in all the land this week, was 1% owned, and it was Nick Folk at 24 fantasy points. So all of that together, let's add it up. 31.98 with Justin Fields. He was our largest owned of the entire week. I should have done this before, but we got the calculator out. We are rocking and rolling with this one. Let's see what we come up with. Drum roll. I should have one, but I don't. And this is taking way too long, and I'm really sorry about all that. But it is going to be... well, it's going to be a good total this week, too. 182.88 fantasy points. So again, a team where Justin Fields is the biggest owned. And then after that, it's Josh Downs. Gets almost 190 fantasy points. So again, fantasy football, so cruel. So cruel. All right, it is time now to shift gears. We're fighting for our lives in fantasy, but there's going to be actual fights happening this weekend. It is UFC 307 in the main event. Alex Pereira defends his title again, which is about the best you can say about this card. But let's get into some early storylines with some fight talk. Into the UFC conversation we go now, and it is UFC 307 going down this weekend, as it is once again an opportunity to see one of the pound-for-pound greats of his time step into the octagon, as Alex Pereira, this time not in an effort to save a card or on short notice, gets a real actual training camp against a real actual opponent. Kind of, as he faces Khalil Roundtree in the main event for the UFC's Light Heavyweight Championship. In the co-main event, it is Juliana Pena taking on Raquel Pennington as they fight for gold as well. So let's get into the early storylines. We begin with Alex Pereira, who, honestly, I hope he is taking Khalil Roundtree much more seriously than I am, because my first note is Pereira needs to stay focused. This is not the bright lights of UFC 300. This is not the bright lights of a Madison Square Garden show that he has come in last minute and saved. This isn't International Fight Week that he is coming in and saving. This is just a regular ass pay-per-view. It is a one after the Sphere. It is all of these things, and it's against an opponent that is probably one of the worst he has faced in the UFC, to be perfectly frank. So he needs to keep that focus and not think about any of those things that I just said, and just walk into that cage on Saturday and take care of business. He needs to be able to keep that momentum going. And this is like a few of the boxing ones that we have done of this, where we are already looking at what is next. And I am continuing to bang that drum, hoping that what is next is an opportunity in the heavyweight division. This is a guy who, yes, there are probably a couple other fights who that he needs to take care of at 205 pounds. Rakic, Madrimov, a couple of those sorts of things. But This is someone who wants to go out and make history. And it's not like you have a heavyweight division that is beating down with contenders right now. You have two very old men who haven't fought in a very long time who will be fighting for your heavyweight championship next month. After that, you got a young stud who is knocking out every other contender on their way toward the heavyweight championship. So I'm not saying Pereira needs to get a heavyweight title opportunity next, although fun. I am saying that his next fight, I think, should be at 265 pounds. That is my personal belief. For Roundtree, he seems like a weird challenger. He had his last fight canceled because he tested positive for a banned substance. So the fight at UFC 303 gets pulled, and as punishment, he gets a championship opportunity. This is so weird. I was going to say, coming into this, that he feels like a mandatory challenger in boxing, but he doesn't even feel like that. Like, this is beyond the scope of what I think a mandatory challenger in boxing would get. Honestly, this is kicking it old school a little bit. This is like the old Pride Grand Prix, where it's like, all right, well, it's the middleweight Grand Prix. I mean, we're not going to have the middleweight champion in, so he gets to face whoever, the 8th or 16th seed or whatever they would do. And so he goes in there against some absolutely poor sucker to just get obliterated. That is honestly what this feels like right now. And so this is, I think you can tell I'm not taking Roundtree overly seriously as a championship opposition. But Roundtree has an opportunity to pull off what would be the wildest upset in the history of the sport. This is, I think this would definitely be bigger than Rousey. And it would be like up there with Sarah against GSP. When you consider that Pereira could be a triple champ by the time next year is done. Someone who is a champion in 3 different weight classes, probably not at the same time. That would be tough. But someone who has at least made that kind of history. He is right now, pound for pound, on my pound for pound rankings, number 2. And I think at worst you could put him 3rd. He's on an absolute tear. Roundtree his last win was against Anthony Smith, who we are just starting to, is he still good? Is he not? Not exactly a number 1 contender type of a fight. So Roundtree this weekend has a chance to shock the world in what I think would be the biggest upset in the history of the sport. Moving into the co-main event, also for a championship, as Juliana Pena looks to get back the belt that she won for a second against Amanda Nunes. For Pena, it is put up or shut up. She has been trying to go the Chael Sonnen, Colby Covington, whatever route of being the trash talker and I'm going to play the heel. And she kind of sucks at it. And no one cares. And, Amanda Nunes is retiring because she's scared of me. No one believes that. No one's believing you. Not at all. And so, yeah, you get a huge upset win over Amanda Nunes. Congratulations. That is one of the biggest upsets in the history of the sport. Nunes came out after and kind of proved it was a fluke by whooping that ass for 5 rounds. Pena's 3-2 in her last 5. If she wins this, then I'm not saying it validates everything. And, Amanda Nunes was actually scared of her. Because I don't believe that for a second. And I don't believe that this validates Pena in being as good as she thinks she is. But it is a bit of validation, right? It's a 2-time champion now, if she's able to pull that off. If she loses, I don't think she will be taken seriously ever again as a title challenger, to be perfectly frank. For Raquel Pennington, it's kind of playing with house money. I don't think anyone thought she would have had this resurgence after Nunes lays down one of the most one-sided ass kickings in the history of the sport on Pennington back in 2018. She follows that up by missing weight, and losing to Jermaine Durandamy to be able to bounce back and work her way into this opportunity. To be a champion again is an unbelievable bounce back for Raquel Pennington and an unbelievable kind of final act to this career. So we will see what comes of this fight this weekend. I'm very intrigued by this one. Overall, this isn't the biggest card out there. This isn't UFC or Noche UFC. This isn't one of those, but you got a couple of intriguing fights anyway at the top of the card. Coming up tomorrow, we'll look at the non-main event fighters that you should pay attention to on this particular show. But now let's move into the world of basketball, as we had a blockbuster trade happen over the weekend. Let's talk about it. All right. The the NBA world got shooketh over the weekend as the New York Knicks send Dante DiVincenzo and Julius Randle on their way to Minnesota in exchange for Karl Anthony Towns. And so, yes, this throws off a few NBA preview things that I do. We're still going to put out the mega preview on the eve of the NBA season, but there's going to have to be a couple disclaimers like, hey, this was recorded before that trade happened. And today was supposed to be NBA players on the hot seat, and two of them were Karl Anthony Towns and Julius Randle. So I suppose fitting that both players get moved in this particular deal. But let's start with the Knicks, because I like them more. They get the best player in this trade in Karl Anthony Towns. They needed a center with Mitchell Robinson being banged up and Hartenstein now being a Thunder. Boy, did they go out and get one. If this works, this can be a title team. I have said that. I've said that about this team before. Deeds, welcome back. Sorry that pesky work thing gets in the way. But happy to see you back. We still got some NHL talk coming up after the basketball here, and some Flames to close things out today. But I have said before that this is a New York Knicks team that is now a championship caliber roster. And you have now added Karl Anthony Towns to that. And so if he can properly integrate into this team, and the best version of him, I think, fits this team really well, where he doesn't need to be he's not a ball stopper. He doesn't need to, all right, now I got it, now I'm going to do my thing and I'm going to put it up. He can be a spot shooter and can kind of spread the floor a little bit. He provides them with a real big body presence down low that they didn't really have. Hartenstein and Robinson both at times were able to do that, but in terms of being like just a scorer down low, Towns is infinitely better than both of those guys. And so I think he can kind of fit with Brunson and Bridges in a very interesting way. On the defensive side, it's not perfect. He fouls a lot. And that is going to be the issue here, or one of the issues, I think, here, is defensively, when you are playing for Tom Thibodeau, a lot is expected of you. And you can't do that when you are onto the bench after you've fouled a lot. And that was always the frustration with this guy, is he can find himself in foul trouble for just the dumbest fouls you could possibly imagine. And so that is where you start to get into the oil and water aspect of this, because we had said before that the Knicks have carved out their identity. When you see a player out there, you're like, you know what? That's a Knick. Karl Anthony Towns is not that. And so you do lose a touch of that. But you also get a really interesting, very talented player at his peak. Like Game 7 against the Denver Nuggets, he had a monster game and helped them put the Nuggets away and move on to the Western Conference Finals. And so like there is a really, really good player in there. I do also think that it never really clicked in Minnesota, and I think that was kind of weighing on him a little bit. The fact that there was a new guy coming in to be the guy when he was the guy before, I don't think he ever really fully embraced that. Now he is coming to a team that isn't his team, but it's guys who he's familiar with from different aspects of life, right? So there is, I think, a really intriguing part of this team now that I'm excited to see it work. There is a part of me that is just a little bit like, oh, like, I liked how they were constructed. I liked how they were put together, and I wanted to see it work. But now, offensively, this is going to be a difficult team to stop. We will see what they're able to do defensively. But I do think that he fits there a little bit well. On the Minnesota side, it gets you out of a gigantic contract. And DiVincenzo, I think, like, fits in with this Minnesota group quite well, and what they are looking to do in kind of a second unit. He's still going to be a bench player on this team, but I think he fits this group very, very well. It's Randle that I'm not sure about, because Randle is that guy who, when he gets the ball, it all just kind of stops. And it's why it never really fit with him with the Knicks. Although, like, I'm saying it didn't really fit with him with the Knicks. Like, he's a two-time All-NBA and is a very good basketball player. And I think that gets lost in a few things sometimes. But with him and Edwards, like, Edwards needs the ball to be able to create and do all of those things. Well, so does Randle. And when Randle gets it, it's, okay, I'm going to back you down. I'm going to spin around. Oh, I'm a little point forward. Oh, and I'm going to shoot a three. And it's not going to work. And so, yeah, I have questions about the fit there, but like long-term contract-wise, I think it's an interesting move. It kind of gets them out of a couple of things, and now it is a big prove-it year for Julius Randle as well. So I don't think that this is a team now that takes a big step back. Towns, like, they replaced his minutes with Reed really effectively and didn't really miss a beat without him. So I think they just kind of slide him in there. We will see where Randall kind of fits with all of that, though, because I can't imagine Randall's going to be stoked to come off the bench in Minnesota after starting in New York. So it's again, it's an interesting fit out there. Overall, I do think the Knicks win this trade, because I do think Karl-Anthony Towns just kind of raises the ceiling a little bit for this group offensively. It's a difficult fit defensively, but they have enough guys who can go out there and get stops defensively that I don't think it's going to be much of a hindrance. So I'm very excited to see how this all plays out, and to kind of recalibrate what I think of both conferences after a blockbuster trade. Okay, it is we are creeping up to the start of the hockey season, so let's talk some Calgary Flames to close this show out. All right, the Calgary Flames are creeping closer and closer to the start of their season. And it is, like, there have been a few things where it's like, okay, hey, maybe this guy will, you know what? No, not really. That's not gonna, okay, well, maybe it's this guy. Okay, no, not the way to go. And now, the one thing that has surprised me is some of the talk around Jacob Pelche, where it's like, all right, well, can you waive him? Can you whatever? It's like, well, he's not having a great preseason. And this is where the preseason can get so very frustrating, because the thought of waiving Jacob Pelche, I don't think should even enter the Calgary Flames' minds. I think that would be just the height of overreaction to some stuff with him. And so to possibly lose him on waivers, I can't. I don't think the Flames should either. And so yes, like, no, the preseason has not gone well for him. But I do still think that this is a kid who has a real upside and can play a style of hockey that can benefit your team for a really long time. He does need to start showing it at the NHL level. And he does need to start proving it a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. But he has also had injuries really hinder his career. And it is a very difficult spot, because if there was no waivers, you would just send him back to the American Hockey League so fast and let him start to work some of these things through. But you can't with him, or else someone will claim him. And I don't think there is any debate someone would claim him. When you look at the resume and the pedigree and all of those things, I don't think from a Calgary Flames standpoint you can afford to risk losing this kid on waivers. Like, this is, if another team, if the Vancouver Canucks version of Jacob Pelche popped up on waivers, every Flames chat everywhere would be saying, this is the type of guy the Flames should be going after. First round pick, didn't get his opportunities because he was banged up, and a couple of other guys kind of leapfrogged him, but now we have a shot to give him a little bit of room. And we've talked before about how kind of jammed up the forward group is with the Flames, and so you do have to kind of maneuver his way in. But I think this is one that you have to maneuver. We've talked about Coronado. I don't think you have to pass him through waivers. I'm pretty sure on that. So I think more seasoning for him, fine. For Pelche, I do think that there is a middle six forward there. If he has to start the year on the fourth line, then he starts the year on the fourth line. I would rather that than lose him. So some of those conversations have been really surprising. On the Cooley one, I do think that everyone gets a little bit like, oh man, how could you might lose this. He's a goalie. He's on waivers. If you did, I think it would be okay. I know we've talked a bit before about, like, we love the personality. He shut down the Oilers, and an Oilers fan chimed in on the, that might have been on the Game Over YouTube channel, where someone came in the comment section and talked about him. But either way, like, the thought of losing Jacob Pelche is whatever. But Cooley, I don't think I'd be too heartbroken. I think you can pass him on waivers, and I think it'd be fine. We did this with Yanni Ortio a few years ago. I think it'll be okay. And if it's not, all due respect to Cooley, there's going to be another version of Cooley that pops up on the waiver wire at some point, or an undrafted free agent, or whatever. That there is going to be that. You can find another version of that. So I wouldn't lose too much sleep over it. But yeah, very excited that we are getting closer and closer to the start of the NHL season. All right, this is the first one of these in a while that we've kept under an hour. So thank you, Deeds, Crimney, and Toxic in the chat for popping in today. If you guys missed anything, all this will be available in podcast and in YouTube form. Just quickly for me for the rest of the week, tonight going to be at Wild Rose Wrestling at Brickwell Tap House. 7:30 is bell time, so come check us out in the northern part of the city. Also, I haven't really talked about it a whole lot on here, but Sea of Dead is back, and orders, I'm going to pick them up today. So, seaofdead403.ca, if you want to get, we got a Stampede Wrestling shirt, we got a Run YYC, and we got a Cannons hat available right now. We have picked up the order. There's still a lot that you can get. But yeah, check it out here. I'll put it in the chat for all of y'all. seaofdead403.ca. We got a really cool Stampede Wrestling shirt, kind of in a Raw is War sort of a style. Run YYC, like Run DMC, and then a black Calgary Cannons hat that is super cool. So check that out on there right now. And then coming up tomorrow, tomorrow's show is going to be busy. It is going to be NHL win total projections, Eastern Conference, Western Conference. We're going to get into the non-main event UFC fighters for that card. NFL power rankings, we're going to dive into that as well. And NBA, we're going to look at players and coaches on the hot seat. Just players on the hot seat. Going to have to recalibrate that after the big trade here. So a lot still to come this week. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you guys a couple of times tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.